I asked my friend to go test my husband if he is loyal. Now they are getting married next week. It started subtly, almost innocuously, the kind of thing that makes you convince yourself you're still in control. Harmless coffee meetings, casual flirts, innocent conversations designed to test his loyalty. My friend insisted they were nothing serious, just ways to measure the truth of what I already feared. I sat at home, poring over every detail, convincing myself this was simply an experiment, a harmless exercise meant to confirm that the love I had wasn't a lie. I told myself I was protecting my heart, safeguarding years of trust and shared memories, ensuring that the foundation of my life wouldn't crumble unexpectedly. At first, it seemed harmless. He responded with polite amusement, the kind of reaction I expected from someone who loved me, someone who wouldn't take a casual provocation seriously. I watched him carefully, measuring every word, every smile, every pause. Each day, I reassured myself that nothing had changed. He's loyal. He would never betray me. This is only to prove it to myself. But while I was sitting in the safety of my own assumptions, while I tried to wrap myself in the comfort of rational explanations, something unexpected began to happen, something I couldn't have anticipated, something that quietly unraveled everything I thought I knew. My friend, my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone, started to see him not just as a test subject, but as a person she could care about. I noticed the way her tone shifted when she spoke of him, the subtle warmth creeping into her voice, the way her eyes lingered a little too long when she described a simple conversation. And he started to respond. At first, it was nothing that could be pointed to, nothing blatant, nothing that anyone else could see. But I felt it in small, almost imperceptible ways. He laughed a little longer at her jokes than seemed necessary. His casual gestures toward her, once polite and friendly, began to carry a softness I hadn't seen before. When they spoke privately, his posture shifted, relaxed in a way he hadn't done with me for months. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that these were tiny coincidences with no real meaning. But deep down, the gnawing feeling told me otherwise. The cracks were invisible at first. No one outside that bubble of deception could see them, and perhaps if I had been honest with myself sooner, I might have caught them in time. But I began to notice. Lingering looks that lasted just a second too long. Inside jokes that didn't include me, small shared moments that left me standing on the edge, wondering what had shifted in the space between them. Conversations I wasn't part of, laughter that reached my ears but didn't feel directed at me. I began to watch them more closely, like someone examining a slowly spreading stain on a once pristine wall. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture became magnified, impossible to ignore. My best friend, the person I had trusted to protect me, was now the center of my fear, the one who had placed the seed and nurtured it. And he, the man I had loved so completely, the man I had believed was untouchable in his loyalty, was responding. Not overtly, not with declarations, but in ways that hinted at a shift I could neither confirm nor deny. The more I watched, the more I noticed the changes. Little things became unbearable. A smile exchanged across a table that seemed to stretch just a fraction too long. Shared laughter that included subtle glances, a secret language that I wasn't privy to. Messages sent in the quiet of the night, harmless on the surface, but the way he typed them, careful, deliberate, lingering, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. I started questioning everything. Every memory, every promise, every quiet reassurance I had held on to for months became suspect. Did he love me? Had he ever? Or had this test, this dangerous, reckless test, opened a door I could never close? And my best friend, what did she feel now? Had she, in the course of trying to protect me, crossed a line I could never forgive? The tension between us became a silent, constant presence, like a storm that had not yet broken but whose clouds were heavy and oppressive. I watched them together and felt my heart constrict with a mixture of fear, anger, and grief. I felt betrayed in ways I had never anticipated. By him, by her, by my own weakness in allowing this experiment to take place. Every attempt to rationalize the situation only made it worse. I tried to tell myself that nothing had happened, that he had not acted on any feelings, that my friend had not crossed a boundary, that my love was still intact. But denial was a fragile shield against the truth I could see in the subtle moments between them. That shared laugh, that hidden glance, that slight hesitation when he responded to her, these were things I could not unsee. The air between us shifted. It was no longer the safe, warm love I had cherished. It became a minefield, every interaction layered with suspicion, every smile weighed against 1,000 unspoken possibilities. I began to feel the isolation of knowing something that no one else could confirm, the quiet, gnawing horror of witnessing the slow, inevitable erosion of trust, the very foundation upon which our love had been built. And yet, in the midst of that fear, there was a terrible, thrilling temptation, a part of me that wanted to continue watching, to see how far this could go, to see if my worst fears would come to pass. It was as if the danger itself had become addictive, drawing me deeper into a spiral I could neither escape nor confront. By the time the reality fully began to take shape, it was too late. What had begun as a harmless experiment, a desperate attempt to protect my heart, had transformed into a web of deception, betrayal, and desire. The people I had trusted most had shifted, subtly, irreversibly, into forces I could no longer control. And as I stood on the edge of this new, terrifying reality, I realized with a cold certainty that the love I had once believed untouchable was now teetering on the brink of collapse. It started subtly, almost innocuously, the kind of thing that makes you convince yourself you're still in control. Harmless coffee meetings, casual flirts, innocent conversations designed to test his loyalty. My friend insisted they were nothing serious, just ways to measure the truth of what I already feared. I sat at home, poring over every detail, convincing myself this was simply an experiment, a harmless exercise meant to confirm that the love I had wasn't a lie. I told myself I was protecting my heart, safeguarding years of trust and shared memories, ensuring that the foundation of my life wouldn't crumble unexpectedly. At first, it seemed harmless. He responded with polite amusement. The kind of reaction I expected from someone who loved me, someone who wouldn't take a casual provocation seriously. I watched him carefully, measuring every word, every smile, every pause. Each day, I reassured myself that nothing had changed. He's loyal. He would never betray me. This is only to prove it to myself. But while I was sitting in the safety of my own assumptions, while I tried to wrap myself in the comfort of rational explanations, something unexpected began to happen, something I couldn't have anticipated, something that quietly unraveled everything I thought I knew. My friend, my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone, started to see him not just as a test subject, but as a person she could care about. I noticed the way her tone shifted when she spoke of him, the subtle warmth creeping into her voice, the way her eyes lingered a little too long when she described a simple conversation. And he started to respond. At first, it was nothing that could be pointed to, nothing blatant, nothing that anyone else could see. But I felt it in small, almost imperceptible ways. He laughed a little longer at her jokes than seemed necessary. His casual gestures toward her, once polite and friendly, began to carry a softness I hadn't seen before. When they spoke privately, his posture shifted, relaxed in a way he hadn't done with me for months. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that these were tiny coincidences with no real meaning. But deep down, the gnawing feeling told me otherwise. The cracks were invisible at first. No one outside that bubble of deception could see them, and perhaps if I had been honest with myself sooner, I might have caught them in time. But I began to notice. Lingering looks that lasted just a second too long. Inside jokes that didn't include me, small shared moments that left me standing on the edge, wondering what had shifted in the space between them. Conversations I wasn't part of, laughter that reached my ears but didn't feel directed at me. I began to watch them more closely, like someone examining a slowly spreading stain on a once pristine wall. Every glance, every word, every subtle gesture became magnified, impossible to ignore. My best friend, the person I had trusted to protect me, was now the center of my fear, the one who had placed the seed and nurtured it. And he, the man I had loved so completely, the man I had believed was untouchable in his loyalty, was responding, not overtly, not with declarations, but in ways that hinted at a shift I could neither confirm nor deny. The more I watched, the more I noticed the changes. Little things became unbearable. A smile exchanged across a table that seemed to stretch just a fraction too long. Shared laughter that included subtle glances, a secret language that I wasn't privy to. Messages sent in the quiet of the night, harmless on the surface, but the way he typed them, careful, deliberate, lingering, made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. I started questioning everything. Every memory, every promise, every quiet reassurance I had held onto for months became suspect. Did he love me? Had he ever? Or had this test, this dangerous, reckless test, opened a door I could never close? And my best friend, what did she feel now? Had she, in the course of trying to protect me, crossed a line I could never forgive? The tension between us became a silent, constant presence, like a storm that had not yet broken but whose clouds were heavy and oppressive. I watched them together and felt my heart constrict with a mixture of fear, anger, and grief. I felt betrayed in ways I had never anticipated. By him, by her, by my own weakness in allowing this experiment to take place. Every attempt to rationalize the situation only made it worse. I tried to tell myself that nothing had happened, that he had not acted on any feelings, that my friend had not crossed a boundary, that my love was still intact. But denial was a fragile shield against the truth I could see in the subtle moments between them. That shared laugh, that hidden glance, that slight hesitation when he responded to her, these were things I could not unsee. The air between us shifted. It was no longer the safe, warm love I had cherished. It became a minefield, every interaction layered with suspicion, every smile weighed against 1,000 unspoken possibilities. I began to feel the isolation of knowing something that no one else could confirm, the quiet, gnawing horror of witnessing the slow, inevitable erosion of trust, the very foundation upon which our love had been built. And yet, in the midst of that fear, there was a terrible, thrilling temptation. A part of me that wanted to continue watching, to see how far this could go, to see if my worst fears would come to pass. It was as if the danger itself had become addictive, drawing me deeper into a spiral I could neither escape nor confront. By the time the reality fully began to take shape, it was too late. What had begun as a harmless experiment, a desperate attempt to protect my heart, had transformed into a web of deception, betrayal, and desire. The people I had trusted most had shifted, subtly, irreversibly, into forces I could no longer control. And as I stood on the edge of this new, terrifying reality, I realized with a cold certainty that the love I had once believed untouchable was now teetering on the brink of collapse. It was one of those warm, golden afternoons that felt like the world was holding its breath. The kind of day where sunlight pours through windows in lazy streams, turning dust motes into little dancing stars. I had reluctantly agreed to attend a mutual friend's party, more out of obligation than desire. Honestly, I was content with a quiet evening alone, maybe curled up with a book or simply staring out at the sky, letting the soft hum of life drift over me. But my friend's persistent texts had worn me down, and now here I was, standing awkwardly in the middle of a crowded living room, clutching a glass of something sparkling, wondering why I ever said yes. Then I saw him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't strikingly flamboyant or dramatically noticeable. He didn't command attention with jokes or stories. And yet, there he was, standing across the room with that rare kind of quiet confidence that makes people take notice without even trying. Calm, comfortable, present. His posture wasn't rigid, yet it wasn't slouched either. It was the kind of posture that suggested he had nothing to prove and no one to impress. My first thought, almost to myself, was a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Who is he? I watched him for a while, unnoticed in my corner as he laughed softly at something someone said, the kind of laugh that wasn't forced, the kind that lingered in your ears long after it was gone. Then he smiled. And it wasn't a simple, polite smile. It was the kind that touches something deep inside you. The kind that reaches your chest and stirs a warmth you didn't realize was waiting there. I found myself holding my breath for a moment, caught off guard by the strange, sudden intensity of my interest. By the time I had worked up the courage to approach him, I felt my heart beating in a way that was equal parts excitement and fear. You're acting ridiculous, I told myself, but somehow I didn't care. His presence was magnetic, but not in the usual showy way. It was subtle, quiet, irresistible. We spoke for what felt like an eternity compressed into minutes. Small talk flowed effortlessly into deep conversation. He had a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. His eyes didn't just look at you. They seemed to understand you, to see the edges and the corners of your soul without judgment. When he spoke, each word felt deliberate, as though he had chosen it carefully just to make the moment better, warmer, more significant. By the end of that night, I knew I had to see him again. I don't know if it was destiny, chance, or simply luck, but the universe seemed to conspire in the quietest ways to keep our paths crossing. A week later, we went out for coffee. One date turned into two, then three, and soon we were spending long afternoons wandering the city streets, talking about everything from our childhoods to our biggest fears, from the books we loved to the songs that made us cry. It was slow, painful, and lonely, but it was real. For the first time in years, my life wasn't built on appearances or validation. It was built on survival, on truth, on strength. Michael had taken everything, my wealth, my health, my peace. But he couldn't take my will to rise. And as I watched the sunrise over the city one morning, I realized something profound. I had lost the world's approval, but found myself again. And that, in the end, was worth more than everything he ever stole. Ngozi became my eyes and ears in the world I had once ruled. She was sharp, composed, and connected in ways that seemed almost divine. Where I had once been surrounded by deceit and betrayal, she became the single thread of truth I could hold on to. Through her, I gained access to documents I hadn't even known existed. Contracts Michael had hidden under dummy corporations, offshore accounts he had created to siphon my investments, and recordings that revealed how methodically he had orchestrated my ruin. Each file she handed me peeled back another layer of his deception, and with every revelation, I understood more clearly that my fall hadn't been accidental. It had been engineered. It was strange at first, trusting someone again. My world had crumbled because I trusted too easily. My heart had been used as a weapon against me, and my faith had been mocked. I was cautious, defensive even. I would stare at my phone for hours before replying to Ngozi's messages, trying to read between every word for signs of betrayal. But Ngozi was patient, almost unnervingly so. She didn't push or pity me. She simply stood by, always offering strategy when I was ready to listen. "You may have been blindsided," she told me one night during an encrypted video call, her face lit softly by the glow of her laptop screen. "But he underestimated you. He forgot the woman who built an empire from nothing. You're not broken, Amara. You're recharging." Those words became a balm to my bruised spirit. With her guidance, I began to rebuild, quietly and carefully. She connected me to legal experts who specialized in corporate recovery and personal restitution. They taught me how to trace every lost asset, how to undo fraudulent transfers, how to fight back, not with emotion, but with evidence. Ngozi also linked me to discreet medical specialists who helped me manage my illness privately. I began a strict treatment regimen that stabilized my health and slowly restored my strength. And as my body began to heal, my mind followed. I started to remember who I was before Michael, the driven, visionary woman who had once inspired thousands. She became more than an ally. She became a lifeline. We exchanged late-night messages filled with both strategy and silence, the kind of silence that only two people fighting for survival could understand. Sometimes she reminded me to eat. Other times, she reminded me to rest. And one evening, as I watched the city lights flicker from my balcony, I realized something powerful. Michael had taken almost everything from me. My reputation, my finances, my confidence, and even my health. But he hadn't taken the one thing that had always defined me, my mind. He could manipulate, deceive, and destroy, but he couldn't think like me. That realization was the turning point. With Ngozi by my side, the fog that had clouded my vision began to lift. For the first time in months, I saw a path forward, not as a victim, but as a strategist. For the first time, I felt hope. Even in betrayal, there was still loyalty. Even in darkness, a single ally could shine bright enough to light the way. And I was ready to follow that light. The road to healing was nothing like the fairy tales I had once believed. There were no grand gestures of redemption, no sudden transformations. It was slow, often painful, and sometimes unbearably quiet, but it was mine. The first step was acceptance. I stopped pretending. I stopped masking my pain behind perfect makeup and polite smiles. I stood in front of the mirror each morning, studying the woman who stared back, a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes carried exhaustion, her face bore traces of tears, and yet, in the depth of her gaze, there was still fire. "I'm still here," I whispered to my reflection, and that became my daily affirmation. Therapy became my sanctuary. Each session was a storm, raw, uncomfortable, necessary. I learned that grief wasn't linear, and that forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, was harder than anything else. My therapist taught me to speak without shame, to unravel years of suppressed fear, and to stop apologizing for my own survival. Meanwhile, Ngozi remained my constant. She was the bridge between my healing and my rebuilding. She didn't pry into my emotions, she gave me purpose. "You've already suffered enough," she said once. "Now we strategize." Together, we mapped out recovery plans, business restructures, and silent investigations. My health improved with routine, and I began exercising again. Running became symbolic. Each step forward was a declaration that I was no longer stuck in the ruins of my past. I learned to cook again. I laughed again. I started reading fashion journals, sketching late into the night, and reimagining what beauty meant after pain. Slowly, I began designing a collection not for others, but for myself. Each fabric choice, each stitch, was an act of defiance. The journey wasn't perfect. There were nights I cried until dawn, days when my body trembled from exhaustion, and moments when I almost gave up. But each time I remembered Ngozi's words, "He underestimated you." And I refused to let that be the end of my story. By the time I began seeing progress, the whispers of shame that had once haunted me began to fade. I no longer lived for people's approval. I lived for peace. The road was long, but I kept walking. Because every step forward was proof that pain didn't define me, endurance did. The revelation came unexpectedly, like lightning tearing through calm skies. One evening, as I sat reviewing reports about my recovering businesses, Ngozi entered my office holding a thick brown folder. Her expression was unreadable, a calm mask over something deeper. "Amara," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there's something you need to see, something about Michael." I froze. His name was a wound that hadn't fully closed. "What now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She placed the folder in front of me. "This isn't just about what he did to you. It's about what he's done to others. You deserve to know the full truth." I hesitated before opening it, but when I did, my world shifted again. Inside were emails, forged documents, and financial statements that detailed a web of deceit far greater than I had imagined. Michael hadn't only betrayed me, he had manipulated, defrauded, and infected others, repeating the same pattern over and over. As I flipped through the evidence, one detail froze me. He had been diagnosed long before he met me. He had known about his condition and chosen to hide it, deliberately exposing me and others. The air in the room grew heavy. My chest tightened as realization sank in. This wasn't just betrayal, it was cruelty, premeditated, calculated. Ngozi reached for my hand. "He built an empire out of manipulation," she said quietly. "But he's not invincible. You have the truth now, and that's more powerful than anything he owns." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were different this time. They weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of awakening. For months, I had carried guilt, wondering what I had done wrong. Now I knew it wasn't me. It was him all along. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my balcony, watching the moon hover above the skyline, holding the folder to my chest. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the realization that I had loved a monster. But beneath the pain was a spark, a deep, burning need for justice. And that was when I made my decision. I would rise. The comeback wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, strategic. The kind of comeback that happens in silence while the world still thinks you're broken. Months passed, I stayed off social media, ignored the gossip, and worked behind the scenes. With Ngozi's help, I launched a new venture, A&K Revival Group. The name was symbolic: A for Amara, K for the woman I once was before Michael. Together, they formed Revival, a tribute to rebirth. We started with small initiatives: business mentorship programs for women, community health campaigns, and HIV awareness drives. Each project healed a part of me. I was turning my pain into purpose. And then came Resurgence, my first fashion collection after everything. It was bold, unapologetic, and defiant. Every design told a story of survival, of fire rising from ashes. When the collection debuted at a major Lagos fashion gala, I hadn't planned to attend. But Ngozi insisted. "They need to see you," she said with a knowing smile. "Not the headlines, the woman who conquered them." So I went. As I walked into the hall, whispers spread like wind. Cameras flashed. Faces turned. Some people looked shocked, others curious. I held my head high, wearing a gown from my own line, sleek, fearless, and symbolic of everything I had endured. Then the show began. One by one, models walked the runway in designs that carried my scars and triumphs. Each piece was a chapter: strength embroidered into silk, forgiveness woven through gold, resilience reflected in bold patterns. The final dress shimmered like light breaking through darkness, translucent, fluid, alive. When the show ended, the room erupted in applause. The same world that had once laughed at my downfall now stood in awe. A journalist approached me afterward, microphone in hand. "Amara," she said, "after everything you've been through, how did you find the strength to come back?" I smiled, steady and composed. "You don't find strength," I said softly. "You become it." That night, as I stood backstage surrounded by my team, I felt something indescribable: not just victory, but peace. My story was no longer one of pain, but of power. Justice, when it came, was quiet, but absolute. Michael never saw it coming. His arrogance blinded him. He still believed I was the broken woman he had left behind, too shattered to fight. He was wrong. By the time he realized what was happening, Ngozi and I had already compiled everything. Every fraudulent transaction, every hidden account, every fabricated deal. We had testimonies, witness statements, and digital evidence that traced years of deceit. The lawsuit was comprehensive. My lawyers presented the case with precision. The courtroom became the stage where truth finally triumphed. The media covered it relentlessly. For once, they didn't paint me as a scandal, but as a survivor. Public opinion shifted, and Michael's charm couldn't save him. His empire began to collapse under the weight of his lies. When the verdict came, restitution, loss of assets, and criminal charges, I didn't cheer. I simply exhaled. The world had seen justice, but for me it was more personal. It was closure. I walked out of the courtroom calm and composed. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but I kept walking. That night I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony. The city glowed below me, alive and endless. For the first time in years, I felt unchained. Justice had been served, not just by the law, but by life itself. Michael had taken my peace, but in trying to destroy me, he had built the woman who would rise higher than he could ever imagine. And as I looked out into the night, I whispered to myself, "This is the end of your reign, Michael, and the beginning of my forever." It had been 2 years since the trial ended. The world had moved on, but for me, the echoes of that chapter still lingered, not as pain, but as lessons carved into the fabric of who I had become. My mornings were no longer heavy. I no longer woke up with dread, or that familiar ache of fear that something would collapse again. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my curtains, to the gentle hum of my city below, and to the quiet sound of my own breathing, steady, alive, free. Life had taken on a softer rhythm. I no longer chased power the way I used to. Success was no longer about proving myself to the world. It was about building something that outlived the scars. A&K Revival Group had grown beyond anything I had imagined. What had started as a modest foundation run from my living room had blossomed into a movement. We had offices across 3 states, hundreds of women in our mentorship program, and partnerships with hospitals that offered discreet and affordable care to HIV-positive individuals. Every month, we held community workshops on resilience, entrepreneurship, and self-advocacy. And whenever I spoke, I didn't hide my story. I didn't shy away from the name Amara. It no longer carried shame, it carried strength. One afternoon, during one of our empowerment sessions in Abuja, I stood before a crowd of women from all walks of life. Some professionals, some survivors, some still fighting battles they couldn't name aloud. As I looked into their eyes, I saw pieces of my former self reflected back at me, the fear, the shame, the hunger to be seen. Your scars, I told them, are not your weakness. They are your credentials. They prove that you survived what was meant to destroy you. And that means you have the power to build something extraordinary. The hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the sound that moved me. It was the sight of women hugging, crying, holding each other. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just rebuilt my life. I had built a community. Ngozi stood at the back of the room, arms folded, a proud smile playing on her lips. She had become more than a partner in rebuilding. She had become family. After the session, we drove together through the city, watching the sun dip low on the horizon. You know, she said, glancing at me, I always knew you'd get here, even when you didn't believe it yourself. I smiled softly. You gave me the map, Ngozi. I just had to learn to walk again. She laughed. No, Amara, you didn't walk, you soared. That night, as I returned home, I thought about everything we had survived. The late nights planning legal strategies, the tears shared over coffee, the endless phone calls filled with both business and healing. Ngozi had been my anchor, and I had been hers. Our friendship had been forged in fire, and it had endured. But healing, I discovered, wasn't a single moment. It was a lifelong process. Some nights I still dreamt of Michael, not in anger anymore, but in fragments of memory. His voice, his smile, the man I thought he was. It took me a long time to stop asking why. My therapist once told me, closure doesn't always come from answers, Amara. Sometimes it comes from peace. So I learned to make peace with the unknown. I stopped trying to rewrite the past and focused on writing my future. Slowly, love returned to my life, not romantic love at first, but love in its purest form. I learned to love my mornings again, my reflection, my laughter. I learned to love the quiet. And then, when I least expected it, love found me again, gently, cautiously, patiently. His name was Damalola, an architect who volunteered with my foundation to design safe housing for women in crisis. He didn't chase me or overwhelm me. He simply showed up consistently, kindly, without expectation. At first, I kept my distance. The thought of intimacy terrified me. My body had once been a battlefield, my trust, a fragile bridge, but Damalola never rushed me. He treated me not as someone to fix, but as someone to understand. We talked for months about art, about life, about loss. He told me about the building that made him fall in love with architecture, and I told him about the dress that made me fall in love with fashion. He never asked about Michael directly, but he always listened when my voice trembled. One evening, after a long charity gala, he walked me to my car. The night was cool, the stars clear above. You know, he said quietly, you talk about healing like it's something that's done. But I think it's more like breathing, constant, essential, and sometimes difficult. I smiled, surprised by the depth in his tone. And what happens when you forget to breathe? Then someone reminds you, he said, looking into my eyes. That's what love should do. That night, as I drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just smiled. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, love could exist without betrayal. Months later, on a bright Saturday morning, I stood in front of the mirror again, the same one that had once reflected my pain. But this time, I saw someone different. A woman who had walked through fire and didn't just survive, she transformed. A woman who had lost everything but found herself. A woman who no longer needed validation, because her existence was proof of her strength. That afternoon, I attended another Resurgence fashion show, this time not as a comeback queen, but as an icon of empowerment. The models weren't just professionals. Many were women whose lives had been touched by our foundation. Their laughter backstage, their confidence on the runway, it filled the room with light. When I took the stage at the end, the applause was thunderous. But I didn't feel like I was standing above them. I felt like I was standing among them, one survivor among many. I looked at the sea of faces and said simply, "Every woman here has a story, and today we wear them proudly." The cheers that followed were not for fame or fashion. They were for freedom. Later that evening, I drove to the beach alone. The sun was setting, the sky painted in hues of gold and crimson. I kicked off my shoes, walked barefoot across the sand, and let the waves wash over my feet. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, the ocean wind tangling through my hair. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Michael was a shadow now, a name that no longer carried power. The pain had faded, the anger had dissolved. All that remained was gratitude, not for what he did, but for what I learned through surviving it. Because survival wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. As the waves lapped gently at my ankles, I whispered to the sea, "I forgive you, Michael. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The wind carried the words away, and with them, the last fragments of my past. I turned, walking back toward my car, feeling the cool sand beneath my feet and the calm weight of freedom in my chest. Life had come full circle. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had risen. And as the evening sky deepened into night, I smiled to myself, knowing that this was no longer a comeback story. It was a rebirth. And then his voice came, low and steady, filled with a warmth that made my head spin. "I feel it too," he admitted. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But I can't deny it anymore. I love you." Every thought I had been holding on to, the trust, the years of shared memories, the laughter, the plans for the future, fractured in an instant. My world tilted on its axis, spinning out of control, and all I could do was stand there, frozen, as the truth unfolded before me. They weren't hiding it anymore. My best friend, my husband, they had feelings for each other. They weren't just testing loyalty anymore, they were in love. It wasn't just a simple betrayal. It wasn't a minor indiscretion or a fleeting attraction. It was a complete undoing of everything I had believed in. And the most devastating part, the part that made my chest feel like it was being crushed, was that I had unwittingly facilitated it. I had trusted my friend to help protect my heart. I had given her the tools, knowingly or unknowingly, to seduce him, to manipulate him, to awaken something that had quietly existed beneath the surface. The seed of doubt I had nurtured, the dangerous idea I had allowed to grow, had blossomed into a love that was not mine, had blossomed in secret while I remained blind, desperate to believe in the loyalty I had demanded to prove. I sank to the floor, my mind a cyclone of disbelief, grief, and self-recrimination. How could this have happened? How had I been so naive, so trusting, so blind? My best friend, the person I had confided in for years, the one I had leaned on in moments of fear and heartbreak, had become the instrument of my greatest pain. And the man I had loved, who I had thought was unshakable in his devotion, had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, responding to temptation not because I forced him into doubt, but because I had unknowingly created the circumstances that allowed it to flourish. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. My hands shook, my body convulsed with the intensity of the emotions surging through me. Anger, grief, disbelief, shame, all collided into a single, overwhelming force that left me hollow. I had been complicit in the very thing I feared, and now the consequences had become undeniable, irreparable. I remember the way their voices continued, oblivious to the devastation they had wrought, as if my presence, or my pain, didn't exist. Each word, each laugh, each gentle inflection of emotion between them was a dagger twisting deeper into my chest. And in that moment, I realized with a painful, irrevocable clarity that my life as I knew it was over. The betrayal wasn't just in their actions. It was in the fact that I had invited it. It was in the fact that I had planted the seed, nurtured it with doubt, and allowed it to grow unchecked. I had wanted certainty. I had wanted to protect myself. But in doing so, I had opened the door to the one thing I could never have anticipated, the thing that now sat before me, undeniable and monstrous in its simplicity. The people I trusted most had fallen in love with each other, and I had been the architect of their union. Time seemed to freeze as I sat there, listening, watching, feeling every molecule of my existence being torn apart. My chest ached as if it had been shattered, my stomach churned with nausea, and tears, hot, relentless, impossible to stop, streamed down my face. The world I had known, the life I had believed in, the love I had cherished, all crumbled silently around me. And yet, amidst the storm of grief and anger, a single, horrifying truth emerged. I couldn't undo it. I couldn't unhear what I had overheard, couldn't unsee the connection that had formed between them. I was powerless, trapped by my own actions and the consequences I had set in motion. Months of happiness, years of trust, and the very foundation of my marriage now lay in ruins, all because of a moment of fear, a dangerous idea, and the misguided belief that I could control what no one, not even I, had the right to control. And in that moment, as the reality of the betrayal washed over me in an unstoppable tide, I understood the bitter, unyielding truth. Some wounds are born not from the cruelty of others, but from the mistakes we make ourselves. Confronting them wasn't simple. How do you face the two people you trusted most when they are now united in something that cuts so deeply? Words, I realized, could never carry the weight of what I felt. Even if I tried to speak, I wouldn't know where to start. How do you accuse the people you love of betraying you when they haven't even tried to hide it? Every instinct screamed at me to scream, to demand answers, to tear the truth out of them and lay it bare. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of who they once were, who we once were, couldn't bring itself to break the fragile veneer of what had once been beauty and trust. So I withdrew. Not all at once, not in an obvious way that would alert them, but slowly, piece by piece, retreating behind walls I had spent years never needing to build. I smiled when they joked, nodded when they spoke, laughed when they tried to include me in conversations, all while quietly dying a little inside each day. My body existed in the same space, but my heart, my mind, my very soul felt distant, exiled to a place where grief and betrayal tangled in an endless, suffocating spiral. Their laughter became unbearable. At first, I told myself I was being dramatic, that I could handle it, that it was just harmless fun between friends. But with each chuckle, each shared glance, each inside joke, it became a knife twisting in my chest, carving a hollow space that no amount of distraction could fill. The casual way he would brush past her, the ease in her smile when she met his gaze, the quiet camaraderie that once belonged to all three of us, everything had shifted, and I was left standing at the periphery, painfully aware of the void their connection had created. Even the small things became unbearable. Every casual mention of their friendship, the kind I had once admired, now felt like a public reminder of my failure. When they recounted a story from one of their coffee meetings, the subtle joy in their voices was a reminder of how deeply I had been excluded from their world. Even the mundane, the way they planned meals together, the shared playlists, the jokes only they seemed to understand, echoed through me like a relentless drumbeat of betrayal. And yet I couldn't confront them. I couldn't tear apart the fragile semblance of peace for the sake of vengeance or catharsis. I couldn't ruin what they had created, even if it had been at the expense of everything I had loved. My silence became a constant companion, a shadow that followed me through every room, every conversation, every moment of my life. It was a silent agony, a grief without release. A wound I carried that no one else could see or soothe. Each day was a careful performance. I moved through life pretending that nothing had shifted, hiding the storm inside, crafting a mask of normalcy that convinced the world I was unscathed. Friends who knew us noticed a change, subtle but undeniable. I smiled at them, nodded at their questions, laughed at their jokes, but inside, I counted the seconds until I could retreat to the emptiness of my own space, where I could crumble in silence. The weight of knowing what they had become together, the closeness, the affection, the love that had once been mine to trust, was an invisible chain. It pressed down on me constantly, draining the color from every experience, silencing my joy, and replacing it with a hollow, gnawing ache. Even the memories of my life before the betrayal began to taste bittersweet, poisoned by the knowledge that the foundation of our happiness had been manipulated, that the hands I had held and trusted could so easily slip away into someone else. I realized with a grim clarity that this silent agony was worse than confrontation. Confrontation might have brought anger, tears, perhaps even answers. But silence, the quiet, daily murder of my own spirit, was unending. Every laugh I heard between them, every shared glance I witnessed, became a new layer of grief, a reminder that what I had loved and believed in had been dismantled quietly, carefully, and that I had been powerless to stop it. I existed in this limbo, between what had been and what could never be again, caught in the torment of loving the two people who had once meant everything to me, while watching them create a bond that had no place for me. And in that space, I understood a cruel truth. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal isn't in what is done to you. It's in what you allowed to happen, quietly, unknowingly, while pretending that everything was fine. And then the final blow arrived, the invitation. It came on a seemingly ordinary afternoon, slipped quietly through the mail slot, innocuous and yet devastating in its presence. The envelope was heavy, elegant, and impossibly formal. Its weight seemed to press down on me before I even touched it. I recognized the handwriting immediately, confident, deliberate, familiar. There was no mistaking it. I could feel my pulse quicken, my stomach knot, my chest tighten as if the air itself had thickened around me. I picked it up with trembling hands, each movement slow and reluctant, as though I were trying to delay the inevitable. The paper was smooth beneath my fingers, pristine, unblemished. I almost wanted to put it down, to walk away, to pretend it had never arrived. But something inside me, morbid curiosity, perhaps, or the inability to deny reality, forced me to break the seal. I unfolded it carefully, as if handling something fragile, something that could shatter with a single wrong touch. And there it was, the bold, confident letters spelling out their names, the date, the time, the location. A future written in black and white, all planned, all decided, all excluding me. My hands shook violently as I read it. My eyes blurred, tears stinging the edges of my vision, yet I couldn't stop scanning the page. Each word struck like a hammer, each line a cruel declaration of my displacement. My heart screamed, this can't be real. This isn't happening. But there it was. The undeniable, unavoidable proof that the world I had once inhabited, the life I thought I shared, the love I had believed in, had moved forward without me. The thought struck me like ice through my veins. The two people I had trusted, the two I had loved more than I could ever articulate, had chosen each other over me. Every betrayal, every subtle glance, every manipulated test that I had allowed to unfold now culminated in this single, unavoidable truth. They were uniting their lives publicly, formally, permanently, while I remained on the sidelines, a ghost of my former place in their world. I sank to the floor, the invitation trembling in my hands as the reality of it all pressed down. My mind spun, replaying every memory, every moment, every laugh I had shared with him, with her, with both of them. I remembered the first time love had felt effortless, the early months of joy and trust, the belief that nothing could touch us. And now, all of it felt hollow, shattered into fragments that no apology or explanation could ever reassemble. I wanted to burn it, to tear it into pieces and scatter it into the wind, to erase the cruel proof of their happiness without me. But even in that desperate, furious thought, I knew it would accomplish nothing. The truth was already written. Their wedding wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was a monument to the world I had lost, a stark reminder of everything that had been stolen from me, willingly or unwillingly, by those I had trusted most. The room felt impossibly silent, the air heavy with the weight of grief that had no outlet. I traced the letters of their names with a finger, as if touching the ink could somehow change reality, could somehow transport me back to a place where none of this had happened. But the paper remained cold, unyielding, indifferent to my despair. And I realized in the deepest recesses of my heart that life had moved on for them. Their love had solidified, formalized, and celebrated, while I remained suspended in a private hell of silent agony and broken trust. And in that moment, the finality of it struck me with the force of a storm. There was no reconciliation, no second chance, no turning back the clock. The wedding invitation wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a verdict. It declared without ambiguity that I had been removed from their world, that the life I had imagined, the love I had cherished, and the trust I had given so freely had been quietly rewritten by the very people I had loved most. I folded the invitation slowly, almost reverently, as if acknowledging its power, its cruel authority over my heart. And I knew that nothing could ever make this pain vanish. Not time, not distance, not understanding. The two people I had loved had chosen each other. And I, the one who had once believed myself at the center of their worlds, was left to exist only in the shadows of their happiness, carrying the weight of betrayal like an unhealable wound. I stared at the invitation for hours, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, though I hadn't intended to hold it that way. Its edges blurred as tears pooled in my eyes, and the words printed neatly in black ink seemed almost cruel in their cheerfulness. A wedding, my wedding, or what should have been my wedding, now belonged to someone else. The reality hit me with a weight so heavy I thought my chest might cave in. For the first time in months, the full scope of what I had done, what I had allowed, pressed down on me with unrelenting force. I realized that my insecurities, my relentless need to control, my fear of being hurt, had been the spark. I had thought I was protecting myself, shielding my love from betrayal, when in truth I had planted the seed of its destruction. My request for a loyalty test, an idea whispered lightly in a moment of panic, had become the instrument that tore apart everything I held dear. I remembered the early months, how effortlessly love had flowed between us, how safe and warm I had felt in his presence. I remembered trusting my friend with the most delicate parts of my heart, believing she would respect boundaries, believing that our bond was unshakable. And now, the same trust had become a betrayal so complete it felt like a living thing, twisting in my chest every time I thought about it. There was no one to blame but myself. No secret scheme, no malicious intent, no external villain, only me. I had opened the door and they had walked through it. My own hand had created the path for the love I wanted to guard to be stolen, and every smile, every laugh they shared since was a reminder of my own culpability. The guilt burned, but it was nothing compared to the raw, unfiltered heartbreak of loss. The invitation stared back at me, a symbol of what I had inadvertently nurtured. I could see them together in my mind's eye, her in her dress, radiant and confident, and him, smiling at her as though the world no longer held a place for me. The memories of our own plans, our imagined wedding, the vows we had whispered in the privacy of our hearts, felt like fragile glass shards I could no longer touch. Each one cut deeper the more I remembered, each one a reminder of the innocence I had surrendered through my own fear and mistrust. I thought about the quiet months of pretending, the smiles I had forced onto my face, the laughter that never reached my eyes, the countless small betrayals of my own making in the guise of protection. Every act, every omission, every harmless test had compounded into this moment. And I understood with a terrifying clarity that some mistakes do not allow for forgiveness, not from others, and sometimes not even from yourself. There was no one to blame but myself. The choice, the spark, the seed, it had been mine alone. And as I folded the invitation carefully back into its envelope, I understood that loss in its purest form is not about guilt or revenge. It is about confronting a truth that cannot be changed, feeling the emptiness it leaves behind, and somehow, slowly, learning to carry it. I set the envelope down and sat in silence, letting the reality of it sink in. For the first time, I allowed myself to mourn, not the betrayal, not the love stolen, but the version of myself that had thought she could control the uncontrollable. And in that morning, faint and fragile though it was, I felt the beginnings of something like acceptance, the faintest glimmer of a possibility that one day, even this heartbreak might not be the end. As the wedding day drew nearer, the days themselves seemed heavier, each one marked by a sense of impending inevitability. I found myself unable to focus on anything else. Work, friends, even sleep became distant concerns. My mind replayed every detail of the months that had led to this moment, a relentless loop of what-ifs and why-nots. Could I face them? Could I watch the man I had loved, the friend I had trusted above all, stand together in a bond that had once been sacred to me? Could I endure the sight of their joy, without crumbling into pieces? Love is fragile. It shimmers brilliantly in moments of joy and connection, yet shatters with startling ease when shadowed by doubt. Trust, once tested, even with the smallest seeds of suspicion, can fracture in ways you never anticipate, leaving behind shards that cut long after the initial wound has healed. And sometimes, the people you believe will guard your heart, the ones you hold closest, the ones you confide in, are the very ones who, whether intentionally or not, can break it. I walked away with the weight of months pressing against my shoulders, each step heavy with the ache of what I had lost. But even as my heart ached, even as the sting of betrayal and regret burned, I held my head high. I carried the memory of what had been, the love I had cherished, and the mistakes I had made, knowing that they had all become part of a truth I could never unlearn. I had lost something beautiful, yes, but the pain brought clarity. It taught me that love cannot be measured, manipulated, or controlled without consequence. That even the best intentions, when guided by fear or insecurity, can birth devastation. That heartbreak, sharp and unrelenting, is sometimes the only way to understand the depth of trust and the cost of testing it. Some tests, I realized, are never worth taking. Some choices, though seemingly harmless in the moment, ripple outward in ways we cannot anticipate. And some lessons, the most enduring ones, are carved not in comfort, but in the raw, unyielding reality of loss. As I moved forward, I carried those lessons with me, etched into the fibers of my being. I learned to trust more cautiously, to love more wisely, and to protect my heart not through manipulation or doubt, but through clarity, honesty, and acceptance. And while the memories of that love, of the laughter, the closeness, and the loss would linger, they no longer defined me. I had survived. I had learned. I had walked away. And in walking away, I had discovered that even heartbreak can be a teacher, shaping the way we love, the way we trust, and the way we face life with the quiet strength that only comes from enduring the unendurable. Love, as I came to understand, is not just about holding on. It is about knowing when to let go. It's about realizing that even the purest intentions can be twisted by fear, that doubt can be louder than truth, and that sometimes losing someone isn't the worst thing that can happen. Losing yourself while trying to hold on to them is. In the quiet after everything fell apart, I began to see the pattern. I had been so desperate to protect what I had that I forgot love thrives on freedom, not control. I forgot that trust isn't something you test. It's something you build, nurture, and choose to keep believing in, even when fear whispers otherwise. The irony was painful. In trying to prove his loyalty, I had proven my own insecurity. There were nights when I replayed every conversation, every laugh, every small detail that once made us perfect. I used to think perfection was about harmony, about being so in sync that nothing could break you. But perfection, I learned, doesn't exist in real love. Real love is messy. It wavers, it questions, it demands effort and forgiveness. And sometimes it falls apart. What hurt the most wasn't that they found each other. It was that I lost two people I thought would always stand beside me. My best friend, the one who knew my fears better than anyone else, became the person who embodied them. My husband, the one I believed would never betray me, became the proof that love can shift when trust fades. But slowly, as time passed, the sharpness of that pain dulled. I began to see that forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. I needed to release the bitterness that threatened to consume everything gentle left inside me. I couldn't carry anger into the next chapter of my life. It would only poison whatever beauty waited ahead. Forgiveness didn't come easy. It came in pieces, on long walks where I cried without reason, in quiet mornings when I told myself I would be okay, and in nights when I whispered prayers for strength, not revenge. I learned to accept that people make choices, sometimes selfish, sometimes careless, sometimes simply human, and that those choices can reshape lives in ways no one intends. And so I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I let go of the image of who we were and allowed myself to grieve what could have been. I learned to look at the past without wishing to change it, and to look at the future without fear of repeating it. Now, when I think of love, I think of it differently. Love isn't a possession. It's not something you can safeguard with tests or conditions. It's a living, breathing thing, fragile, yes, but also resilient. It asks for vulnerability, for trust, for the courage to believe without proof. If I could go back, I wouldn't run a test. I would talk. I would listen. I would trust until I had a reason not to. But life doesn't offer rewinds, it offers lessons. And this one, though born from heartbreak, became my greatest teacher. Because sometimes, the most painful endings are the ones that free us. They strip away illusions. They force us to confront who we truly are when love fails us. And in that confrontation, in the quiet after the storm, we find something far greater than the love we lost. We find ourselves.